is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats. And today is the final day before the first day of my very own readathon, the No New Releaseathon, which is running for the entire month of October because I decided I was only going to read books published prior to 2020 in the month of October, and with the help of my lovely co-host Diana of the channel Bookish Di, I have turned this into a readathon so that you may all join in with me. Today is also the last day of Hugo voting, and it's not that I've been procrastinating. I actually have not been procrastinating my Hugo reading this year. There's just too much of it, and so today I have been cramming as much Hugo adjacent content in my brain as humanly possible, and I'm feeling a little dazed. But tomorrow I get to put it all aside and read whatever I want, and what I want to read most desperately is some of these older books that have been, in some cases, lingering on my shelves in my TBR for years. So because I have so many books that I would love to read for this readathon, this is going to be a list of just some of the books that I have that I'm thinking I might particularly be in a mood to read next month that fit some of the prompts, all of the prompts. I'm gonna go through all the prompts. I am making absolutely no promises to read any of these books in particular. I will probably read several of them though, but just so you know, for every book that I have on this massively long list that I am going to show you today for fun, there are 5 others that I could pick up instead that I already own. So this video is, in addition to ostensibly being a sort of TBR for this readathon, a larger glimpse into my TBR shelves and what's been sitting around on them. First of all though, if you want to learn more about all of the details of this readathon, I will direct you to my announcement video. All of the relevant information will also be in the description of this video. But just for context, if you haven't watched the announcement, these are the reading prompts. They each award a certain amount of points. You can use one book for up to 3 prompts, 2 bonus prompts in addition to the 1 mandatory prompt that will be fulfilled by whatever year the book was published. All prompts may be repeated any number of times. Each book will get you some number of points. I'm going to be going through the bonus prompts, not the year prompts, and showing you 3 books for each that I'm thinking I might be interested in reading next month. In addition, I have 2 other lists of 3 books that I want to share with you that are sort of on my TBR. The first is this stack of 3 books. These are all books that I have started reading at some point in the last year or so, and then put aside for whatever reason. All 3 of them I'm less than the halfway mark in, and I may or may not have to go back and reread the parts that I've already read. The reason these 3 books in particular are high priority for me is just because they're on my currently reading shelf. I think of them as books in progress. I don't think of them as books I've DNF'd, and I would like to get them cleared off that currently reading shelf. And for me personally, I would choose to count these for the readathon, even though I've started all of them already, because I want to incentivize myself to finish them. The first is The Way Past Winter by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. This is a very wintry, fairy tale-ish middle grade novel published in 2018 that I started reading back in February when I had COVID and it was just too cold and I was feeling too miserable to be reading a book about people feeling cold and miserable. So I put it aside for later and then I sort of forgot about it. This would be a 1-point book for the readathon because it wouldn't fulfill any of the other prompts, but there you have it. A Song for a New Day by Sarah Pinsker, I think would also fulfill the prompt of a book with an LGBTQ protagonist. This was published, I think, in 2019. I was buddy reading this with a friend months ago and just failed. but it was pretty good and I want to finish it. And then To Like the Lightning by Ada Palmer was published in 2016, and I think I would have to go back and start rereading this from the beginning because I was reading this, I think, during last year's Hugo reading period because this series was nominated for the Best Series category. And I thought I was going to read this book, and I just didn't get very far. And this is pretty dense writing. I really don't remember what was happening. So I do think I would have to restart from the beginning with this one. The other stack of 3 books that's not for one of the prompts is going to happen at the end. Moving on to the 1-point reading prompts, a spooky book for Halloween. I have several. The first is Fairy Tales for Wild Girls by Alice Neer. I wanted to read this book so much, so desperately years ago that I ordered it from Australia, from Book Depository, because this has only been published in Australia. I have no idea how to get international shipping on this these days now that Book Depository is dead, but this was published in 2013. It is, I think, YA, and it definitely seems to be spooky. It's described as a deliciously dark bubblegum gothic fairy tale. The first line of the book description on the back is, "There's a dead girl in a bird cage in the woods. Fairy tale spooky, perfect for Kelsey for October." Next is Cuckoo Song by Frances Harding, which has the most terrifying cover in the world. Another one that's YA or upper middle grade-ish. Her books sometimes sort of straddle that divide. I think this one is a changeling story. It's published in 2015, and I have heard that this is spooky. And then an adult spooky book that I have on my list is Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which is her vampire book that is highly regarded by many people who've read it, and I have really enjoyed other things by Silvia Moreno Garcia, but I have not read this one. This paperback copy is the new reissue of this book, but it was originally published in 2016. This would also count as a book by a BIPOC author, which is one of the 2-point prompts. The other 1-point prompt is a book that's a reread. I have 3 very high priority rereads that I might consider picking up in the month of October. The first is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. This is a book I've been intending to reread for years. I especially want to revisit this book in order to remember everything that we learn in this book about the world that it's set in, so that I can remember that to go on and read the other books that have now been published that are set in this world. But I am so nervous to reread this because, like, I am nervous that I'm not going to love it as much as I did the first time, because I loved this book so much the first time I read it. You can see a couple years ago I started to do this reread, but only got this far, and like, it just didn't happen again. My second potential reread on this list is like a teenage slash preteen aged favorite of mine that I would love to see if it holds up to an adult reread, and that is I, Coriander by Sally Gardner. This is a historical fantasy novel that feels very, very fairy tale-ish, despite being not being a retelling of any particular fairy tale. This is a book that I read several times growing up, and there are parts of it that I remember very vividly, and other parts of it not so much. Another book that I have read multiple times, but not recently, not since joining BookTube, I think, is Sunshine by Robin McKinley, which is Robin McKinley's vampire novel, so it would also count as a spooky book. I haven't read that many vampire novels in my life, but this is absolutely my favorite vampire novel I've ever read. I realize I forgot I was trying to list publication years. Sunshine was published in 2003. I, Coriander was published in 2005. And The Goblin Emperor was published in 2014. On to the 2-point reading prompts, more books by BIPOC authors. I have 2 novellas here that are especially high priority, in part because they are the shortest books that I'm thinking I might want to read in October, and so they would be easy points, but also because these are books that I think I might really love, and if I do love them as much as I want to, then they are books that I will want to be recommending to people. These are both published by a small press called Annarlunda Books. The first is The Lilies of the Dawn by Vanessa Fogg, which I believe is a sort of folklore-inspired novella, very, very short. And then Water into Wine by Joyce Chung, which is science fiction. This is about a woman who is inherits a vineyard on a distant planet when, like, the space war disrupts things. Lilies of the Dawn was published in 2016, and Water into Wine was published in 2017. I bought them both much more recently than that, though. A book that I've been meaning to read for possibly about as long as I've been on BookTube is A Stranger in a Laundrette by Sofia Samatar. I have been so certain that I would probably love this book that I have also bought 2 other books by Sofia Samatar that I could go on to read after I read this one, if I love it as much as I think I'm going to. But this is definitely the first book of hers I want to read. The Winged Histories is a companion novel to this one, published afterwards, and then Tender is her short story collection. This was published in 2013. On to books with LGBTQ plus protagonists, which is the last 2-point prompt. I think all 3 of these, from what I've heard, have LGBTQ plus protagonists. I'm not like 100% certain though, so if I'm wrong, please let me know. I also feel like I might discover that some other books I might pick up have LGBTQ protagonists that I was unaware of. The first is Swords Point by Ellen Kushner, which is sort of one of these foundational classics of the fantasy of manners subgenre, which I consider myself sort of a connoisseur of, and yet I haven't read anything in the Riverside series, so that's a problem that I need to fix. This was published in 1987. Next is The Sorcerer of the Wild Deeps by Kai Ashante Wilson. This was, gosh, I felt like everyone was talking about this on certain sci-fi fantasy booktube channels, like when I was new to BookTube. This is from 2015. This is also a book by a BIPOC author, and what I remember hearing about this is that this is a very sort of interesting science fantasy genre situation, and that it maybe reads sort of more on the denser literary side of SFF. This also has either a sequel or companion novella called A Taste of Honey, which I do also own. It's getting toasty in here, so I've lost the jacket. And then I have next The Raven Tower by Anne Leckie. This was published in 2019. And despite the fact that I've heard some like less than enthusiastic reviews for this, I still think I might really like this though. However, I probably won't actually read this unless I first read the other Anne Leckie book on this list. Hold on. Because the next prompt, the first 3-point prompt, is sequels. And one of my highest priority TBR sequels at the moment is Ancillary Mercy, which is the 3rd and final book in the Imperial Ratch trilogy. I would just generally really like to be caught up on Anne Leckie's backlist, which I am far from still at this point. So there's a very real chance I will read this and then move on to The Raven Tower. I could spend a significant portion of this reading month getting caught up on Anne Leckie. This one was published in 2015. The next sequel on this list is Paladin of Souls by Lois McMaster Bujold, which is a companion sequel to the The Curse of Chalion, which I read a number of years ago. This was published in 2003, and I have been assured that I do not have to remember anything about The Curse of Chalion in order to read this, which is good because I don't remember much about The Curse of Chalion. I do remember that I liked the character who is the protagonist of this book. I'm blanking on her name now. When we met her in the first book, I remember being happy to learn she was the protagonist of the second book. Do I remember anything about her? No, I've been told that that's fine and it doesn't matter. And then another book I am hoping I remember enough about the previous books in order to head into this one without doing any rereads is The Labyrinth of Drakes by Marie Brennan. This is the fourth book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. I also have the fifth book. I really liked the first three and then I just never kept going. This one was published in 2016. And then the other 3-point reading prompt is a story collection or anthology, and honestly, of all the reading prompts I've got here, this is the one where I'm feeling less likely to read anything for this prompt. I have many of them on my shelves, but I tend to read story collections and anthologies slowly, and I am hoping to read a lot of books in October, and I don't really want to be slowed down. However, I have picked 3 books from my TBR shelves to highlight that there is a chance I might read if I want to be completionist with my prompts. The first is The Ladies of Grace Adieu by Susanna Clarke. This is the other book of hers that I haven't read. I absolutely loved Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell and really liked Piranesi, so the fact that I've had this for so many years and not read it, this was published in 2006, and gosh, I consider Susanna Clarke to be one of my all-time favorite authors, and she's only published 3 books, and I haven't read one of them, and this is a problem. Another one of my all-time favorite authors is Robin McKinley. This is Water, Tales of the Elemental Spirits, which is one of 2 anthologies containing stories by both McKinley and her late husband, Peter Dickinson. The stories of hers in these 2 collections are the only published McKinley fiction that I have never read. These short stories are the only things between me and being a Robin McKinley completionist. And in part because that is sort of daunting to me, and in part because I sort of want to keep like the promise of Robin McKinley fiction that I've never read before alive in the world. I've had these 2 anthologies for years and never read them. I think this one was published in 2009. And then I realized that I had basically nothing I was considering reading from prior to the 20th century. So if I want to be completionist with all the prompts, I also have to find something from the 19th century or earlier to read. And I've got a few, including the Andrew Lang colored fairy books, most of which I have never actually read in their entirety. The one that I have read in its entirety is the Olive Fairy book, which is one of the later ones. I participated in like a group read for that one and really enjoyed the experience, in part because it's one of the later books and is filled with fairy tales that are less well known, less familiar. These early ones have more very familiar, well-known stories in them, but someday I do want to be able to like claim that I've read all of the colored fairy books, and in order to do that I have to start them at some point, from the beginning preferably. I think this one is originally from 1889. On to the 4-point reading prompts, a book over 500 pages. So the first of these books I have to share with you is my contingency plan for the possibility that I won't actually be able in my heart to let go of Hugo reading. once voting closes. Like, that I won't be able to accept in my heart that I have read all that I'm going to manage to read this year, and I will be able to read no more. I did not do all the reading I was hoping to in the series category this year, and one of the nominated series that I was hoping to give a try to was the Founders trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett, starting with Foundry Side. This is a mass market promotional copy that doesn't have a real cover, that they were giving these out at some World Con, I forget which one. That's why I have it. But this is over 500 pages, just barely, both in this fake edition and in the real editions. And I think this first book in the trilogy was published in 2018. Next on this list is one of those books that was absolutely everywhere on BookTube the year I started my BookTube channel, and that is Arcadia by Ian Pierce. This is one of those things that was published as literary fiction, but I guess is speculative, and was getting a lot of praise from like both the litfic side of BookTube and the SFF side of BookTube, and it just felt like a thing that I should be reading at the time, so I bought it and never read it. The paperback edition doesn't look like it's massively long, but the pages are absolutely like thin as can be, and this edition is over 580 pages. And then a much easier book over 500 pages to manage to accomplish would be this one, Wildwood by Colin Meloy, which is a middle grade novel. This is the first in a series. I think it's a trilogy. Again, this was pretty popular when I was new on BookTube, but it had been published a number of years previously. This was published in 2011, and I bought this at some point and never read it. And now it's getting like an animated adaptation from Studio Laika, and if the movie comes out and I still haven't read it, I will feel bad about myself. And then the last of the prompts is a book published in the year you were born. To my knowledge, I have 3 of these on my TBR shelves. There might be more that I'm not aware of, but these are the 3 I know of. And actually, now that I'm looking at these, I have some confusion over the actual publication date of some of these. So I might not actually have 3 books published the year I was born. The first one I thought I had would have been the book that would have given me the most points of any book I could read for this readathon, because it's also over 500 pages, and that's Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. Online, I had looked this up and websites told me it was published in 1992, but the publishing history in the front of this book tells me that it was first published in 1993. So I don't know which information is correct, so this might not work for this prompt. The other one that slightly confuses me in publication date is Ammonite by Nicola Griffith. This one says it was published in 1992. I was confused though because it won the Otherwise Award for 1994, but I think that must be like a cutoff deadline thing. I do think this was published in 1992. And then the last book that I have published in the year I was born is one where I don't know if I've read enough of the prerequisite books set in this world to jump into this one. I need people to tell me, and that is Wild Magic by Tamara Pierce. This is the first book in the Immortals Quartet, but the only other books in the larger Tortall series that I have read were the first 2 books in the Alana series, and I didn't continue with those because I didn't like the first 2 that much. I've been told specifically that the Becca Cooper books are a good place to go next, that you can jump in to without having finished the Song of the Lioness Quartet, but I don't know if this is the same. I need someone to tell me. And then my last set of 3 books is just things that I would be particularly excited to read that don't fulfill any of the prompts except for the publication year. I think all of these are in the 2010s. The first is Bryony and Roses by T. Kingfisher, which is her Beauty and the Beast retelling. This one and The Raven and the Reindeer are like the 2 books of hers that were most recommended to me when I first started reading Ursula Vernon, aka T. Kingfisher, and despite that, I have never read either of them. I've read a whole lot of other T. Kingfisher, though. The Raven and the Reindeer, which is a Snow Queen retelling, I believe would be both a spooky book and a book with an LGBTQ plus protagonist, but it's not the one I most want to read. This is the one I most want to read. And then another book I've been eyeing lately that I've owned for a long time is A Winter's Promise by Christelle Darboux. This is translated by whom? Translated from the French by Hildegard Searle. And this is YA. It's the first in a series called The Mirror Visitor. Let's get a publication date. I think this was published in French in 2013 and in English in 2018. And part of the reason I want to read this right now, I've had this since it was released in hardcover just about, and then I sort of forgot about it for a while, and then recently I've seen like a number of people on TikTok who I kind of trust for YA recommendations specifically, recommending this series very highly, and so I pulled it off my shelves again. I'm like, I want to read you. And then the last book I'm seriously itching to read is one I've got on my Kindle. I've actually got a lot of books on my Kindle that could work for this readathon, but the one I'm thinking of in particular is The Cloud Roads by Martha Wells, which is the first book in the Raksura series. I think I've got the first 2 on my Kindle. I could be wrong. If I read the sequels, they would count as sequels. But this is just the first book. So there you have a bunch of the books, but not all of the books I could or might read for the No New Releaseathon starting tomorrow. Wish me luck. Let me know if you're planning on participating. I would love to see or hear about your TBR if you feel like sharing. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.